Happy solar eclipse day. It is a partial solar eclipse in a lot of Europe and some of North America. Right here in my location in the south of Switzerland, not so surprisingly, it is a total solar eclipse sponsored by the clouds. That is currently the sun. This is the situation all over, not very promising. So I'm just gonna check if there's any location whatsoever I could potentially travel to. Because if it is looking like this, I'm thinking it is pointless to travel anywhere, and I might as well just try from home and hope that there is a hole between the clouds at the right moment. You're watching The Space Koala. My name is Luca. So this is the situation of the clouds. I am currently here, and this would be like a driving distance of 1 hour. The maximum of the eclipse is at 12:06, so we are at 11:30 now, 11:40, 50. I mean, it is ever so slightly better up here, but I'm not convinced that it's worth risking it because I feel like it could change by then. I think I'm just gonna have to try from home and hope for the best. The plan is to shoot with 2 telescopes. I'm setting up my 2 piers on the balcony. I'm mounting my RSD 135 for the smallest one and the RSD 300, which is my largest mount for the other telescope. I really wanted to do the full disc in H-alpha, so I actually designed and printed this adapter that would let me install a 2-inch IR cut filter on my 60mm refractor so that I could use my quark to get a full disc image in H-alpha. But since there are clouds, there's absolutely no chance to shoot the sun in H-alpha, and I feel like white light could still be a possibility, so I'm just gonna let this plan go and go straight to plan B. Plan B is to shoot the full disc in white light as well, so I'm installing my FRA 600 by ASCAR for that purpose on the smaller mount, and I'm going to do a time-lapse with this. And the other telescope is my Celestron C11 HHD, and the plan with this one is to get like a real zoomed-in close-up of the lunar surface against the sun, hopefully with some sunspots. Since this one is really magnifying a lot, I need a finder scope, and then I'm going to use an eyepiece to actually set that parallel. I like to use that antenna on top of that mountain there to set my finder scope parallel to my main scope. I do this on a regular basis. I feel like without an aligned finder scope, I would stand no chance of finding the sun at this magnification. Before installing the solar filter, I always check for any damage. In this case, I also need a small solar filter for the finder scope, which I'm fixing with this very high-tech Scotch tape. It is time to go to the sun now. Of course, since there was no actual polar alignment, I'm not expecting that the sun will be in the picture after I do the go-to. But I have some tricks to find the sun during the day. I know they tell you to look at the shadow of the telescope and see when it's around, but I feel like that is just not accurate enough. So what I like to do is just put a piece of paper or just my hand behind where there is like a gap between the dovetail and the telescope, or in this case the clamp, and when that draws out the actual shape of what that opening or hole is, that's when you're pointing at the sun, and I feel like this is much more accurate than just looking at the shadow. And sure enough, we have the sun. It is now time to set up the other telescope. By the way, if you have one of these solar filters, I highly recommend that you also print or cut out these protective discs, and then you can easily travel without the solar foil getting damaged. So I just kind of press them out, remove the little circles, and I have my perfectly preserved solar foil. I just press that back in. Now these telescopes had been set up for deep sky imaging, so I'm actually gonna remove this camera and I'm gonna remove the focal reducer so that I can get the full 600mm of focal length that I want for my full disc, and I'm gonna install a slightly larger camera. Now for this telescope, I don't even have a finder, so I'm gonna rely entirely on the technique that I showed you before, but I think it should be enough because the focal length is much shorter. It should be feasible to find the sun easily. I found it quite soon, but I ran into another issue, and that is that the sky was so cloudy and windy and everything was like invisible. I had a super difficult time finding the focus point. But once I managed, I just started a time lapse and I never looked back actually, and it was time to set up the main large telescope. At this point, I knew that it was already pointing at the sun, so it was time to install a camera. I installed my ASI 1600mm, otherwise deep sky camera, for this purpose because it had the correct field of view that I had planned for, and it was time to try to get this in focus as well. Once again, this was not super simple, and I'll show you in a second. I recorded the screen actually because with the large amount of wind, it was both moving a lot and especially the clouds were moving a lot, and that meant that the exposure level wouldn't stay at the same level for like 2 seconds for me to be able to actually set up the focus. The second I had the right exposure level and I would have like maybe 5 seconds to actually find the focus, it was not possible because the clouds would either come in or leave, and that would make the sun invisible once again. I figured I would just stop here and wait until there was a more calm period where I would be able to focus better. So I just kept checking for when the event was starting, and it's there. As such, I hoped that this would also give me a better chance of actually focusing because I would have a more sharp shape that would be easier to judge if it's in focus, even if the exposure level is not entirely correct. So 1 second, I wouldn't even be able to see the sun because there were so many clouds, and the next, it would be so sunny that I had a really hard time actually seeing the screen. So that was a struggle, but I think that always is with solar photography. Sometimes I would actually use my VR goggles to project my screen onto because you can always see that in the sun, but this time I wasn't really prepared with that. Regardless, it is now just a waiting game of a good period so that I can actually take some raw videos that I can then turn into a stacked image. Whenever there was like a hole between the clouds, I would quickly start a recording of a raw video. And here I also tried to take a quick recording with my iPhone through my solar Eclipse glasses because I figured if nothing else comes out, at least I will have a picture with the iPhone. If you use the zoom lens and actually get the exposure right, you can see the shape of the sun and you can see the moon in front of it. So I think that's really quite nice for it being done with just a phone. In terms of the close image, I had a very specific plan, and for that, I also needed to rotate my sensor, which was also not simple because it kept moving in the wind and then it kept being over and underexposed, but I really needed the edge of the Pac-Man mouth part of the sun to be aligned and parallel to the long side of my sensor. We have 8 minutes remaining until the peak. The question is if these clouds will get out of the way in 8 minutes. That would be really convenient if I could at least get a picture of the peak, which is still just a small little Pac-Man shape, but still. So the strategy right now is I'm kind of waiting for seeing how the clouds move and preparing for them to move out for a second. And that's when I start recording on the computer. So it is now super sunny and I can barely see my computer screen, but I am taking some pictures. You can see some sunspots as well. And then the moon. So I stopped recording because the weather got a little bit better. I'll show you, I got some images, but it's time to put the telescopes away because it is extremely windy, but this is still the situation, quite cloudy. It is so windy, so clearly that was mostly a failure. As I was saying, it was mostly a failure, but I did get some images. I'm gonna put the telescopes inside right now and I'm gonna process the images. So it is now 9 p.m. I have spent most of the day working through all the things that I've recorded. I have recorded about 20 raw videos to hope to get to that close-up image that I had envisioned, and also I took 750-ish individual frames of the entire disc, hoping to get that time-lapse. And while the time-lapse I would say is somewhat of a failure, let's look at it now. So already I had a difficult time forcing the software to align the disc, and it just didn't work every time because sometimes there was just zero information in the image whatsoever because there were so many clouds. But I still think that this time lapse is somewhat interesting because at least it gives us an idea of how well the sun was actually visible. And I think we can see that there were only 2 or 3 very short windows where it was possible to do anything of value. And as for the close-up, like I said, I took about 20 raw videos, and most of them were completely unusable due to the passing clouds. There were not any windows where there were no clouds, and somehow they would still end up in the stack no matter how I tried to filter the images. So out of all of that effort, I got a single image that I think actually turned out really nice. And this is the result of the best 65% of about 450 frames that I took over a 10-second period. So truly just a moment in time. But seems like that's all that was needed to get a nice image of the sun. So I have stuck that and I have colorized it into this yellow, nice color. I didn't have any color on the original image because it was with a black and white camera, and I think I was just using a luminance filter. I think I wanted to use green, but I'm not sure I remember to change that, so I'm pretty sure it was just luminance. It would have been slightly better if I used like a green or like a narrower field. Regardless, we are able to see the granularity on the surface, and we can also see a nice group of sunspots that were paid actors in the scene. So I'm actually really happy about how this turned out. So this is a screenshot from Sky Safari that I took like maybe last week as I was planning what to do, and I think it turned out exactly how I wanted it. So I'm really happy about that. Of course, I wish it would have been a lot less stressful, and I think it would have been possible to take like even nicer images than this, but I don't think I can complain because I think most of my friends ended up with no pictures whatsoever because it was just cloudy everywhere. I also saw some really nice shots from the other side of the ocean where they had a much larger part of the sun eclipsed, but they had it really low on the horizon and as it was just rising, and I saw some really beautiful shots of that online. So I'm kind of jealous of them as well, but I'm really happy that what I had planned actually worked out. I wish I would have been able to do something in H alpha, but you can't have it all, I guess. I hope that many of you have gotten to observe the eclipse as well. And as by definition of the eclipse, we are in the new moon, I wish you clear skies.